Hi everyone, welcome to the Wheel of Mind, the Wheel of Time point of view reread podcast. This season we've been reading Matt Cawthon's perspective. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 20. I'm your co-host, Lajara Dane of the White Aja.
Aye, and I'm Giskel Simmerus. I be a scholar from Ilion. I worked hard to get rid of that accent later in years. Anyway, I wanted to leave you with a friendly warning about spoilers. We may talk about spoilers from any part of the Wheel of Time series, so please read the entire series before listening to this podcast. Now, I believe I'll get us started off today with Chapter 17, entitled The Triumph of Logic. Mat stalked out of the Tarasin Palace following his audience with Queen Mat-Tylin. Mat was solidly angry and humiliated. Back in the common room of the Wandering Woman, he got to see Harnan sewing up one of the men who had obviously been in a duel, though that was forbidden, so of course no one would tell Mat anything about it. Everyone in Ebu Dar seemed to want to challenge everyone else to a duel, except for Nalesian and Vannon. Nalesian is the only one who cared. When asked, they reported that Tom nor Julian had either one been in yet, but that Nalesian had put an iron-strapped chest in their room, then left muttering something about trinkets. They also reported that Oliver had been spanked for pinching one of the innkeeper's daughters on the bottom. Mat surmised that the boy was picking up too many bad habits from his uncles. Next, they would be giving him a tattoo or something. As well, they reported that there had been, the day before, a terrible fog in the Rihad, one that seemed to devour people. Mat was pretty sure it was another bubble of evil. So Mat sent Vannon to spy out the Tarasin Palace, the one where Jacob Carradine resided. Then he flirted with one of the serving girls on his way up to his room, reflecting on how Oliver needed to learn to act better around women. Who has been teaching him these bad habits? As he unlocked the door to his room, Mat heard a sound behind him and turned to suddenly fight off an attacker. The man had tried to club him, then got a hand around Mat's throat. Mat had to stab the man several times to get himself free. Then, struggling up to his feet, Mat stumbled through an open doorway, and there was another man who grabbed up a club and came at him. Mat threw a dagger into that man's throat, and the would-be thief, fell into a large empty chest in the center of the room. Everyone came running at the sound, including the innkeeper Satel Anan and her husband. Mat explained that it had just been a chance encounter with robbers and stood talking with them for a few minutes and suddenly found a note that was stuffed in his coat pocket. It was a warning that Nynaeve and Elaine were pushing too hard and that the White Tower would not like it very much. The question was, which one of the Aes Sedai had put that in his coat pocket when they'd been playing tug-of-war with him back in the hallway of the palace? Another mystery.
I've only got a couple of notes on this one because chapters 17 and 21, the Mat points of view, were both kind of short, and I wanted to make sure we had enough time to discuss all the chapters in this episode. But one thing I did notice that goes throughout Mat's arc, something we've started noticing, is, of course, all these bad habits that Oliver's picking up from him that Matt doesn't realize are from him.
It's a recurring joke every week now, yes.
Yeah, it really is. But this chapter made me think a little bit more about what habits he's picking up from Mat specifically that don't seem to line up with what we see of Mat. And it's kind of confusing. So the fact that Oliver pinches bottoms here that we learn about in this chapter, do we actually have any evidence that Oliver has seen Mat do that? Because every on-page interaction we've ever seen between Mat and any woman suggests that that's not the case. I mean, he certainly likes women. He's certainly always flirting and that kind of thing. He's certainly pretty physical and he likes to dance and cuddle and kiss and all these things. But I don't know that we've ever seen him just like pinch a serving woman's bottom or something. He seems to only escalate things, I guess you could say, in a romantic sense if he feels that she's on board with the kind of lower level stuff that he starts with, the flirting and stuff. So it could just be Oliver not understanding the difference and thinking that that's just part of the flirting, and so he's not imitating the behavior specifically that Mat does, but he's kind of imitating Mat being a ladies' man in general. But Another way to read this is that maybe we are supposed to read in between the lines and see through Oliver's actions that Matt actually does do more of that stuff. It's just not through his perspective or on screen. And that he might be a little more of kind of a harasser to some people than maybe how he thinks of himself. And many people take this type of information and they use it in their justifications of the either comedy or some kind of ironic justice of Mat-Tylin supposedly turning the tables on Matt. But I just don't ever see him bother anybody like that on screen or even explicitly from anybody else's perspective. So it's just strange and confusing to me that this little piece of information about Oliver, where he's going, where is he learning that habit, is juxtaposed not with Matt going after or flirting or harassing anybody, but it's juxtaposed, written in the chapter sequentially with, at that moment when he's thinking about it, Kyra is actually coming on to him. Yes. Instead of him doing anything else. So the messaging being sent here and the sequencing and the way it's written is actually just really confusing to me.
In my mind, Matt is a little more smooth. I don't think he's as much a bottom pincher as he is, flirting, winking, getting her attention. If she smiles back, then, we start, as you said, escalating things. But only with women who want to escalate that back. At least in his mind. Now, if he's doing other things like that, he's not really thinking about it, or he doesn't think of that as being a faux pas, something you don't do. This is a forbidden zone. You don't touch someone there. So either he just doesn't think of that as being creepy and wrong, or he doesn't do those things, but Oliver sees him constantly flirting with women, and so Oliver's take is, okay, that's what we do. We flirt with women. And then he tries to copy the things that Matt does, but then he also sees some of the other men who may be a little more crude and who might pinch the serving girls. And, oh, cool, well, that's how they flirt. Let me try that too. And let's be honest, we learn a lot of what we're supposed to do and not supposed to do in society by making mistakes. Even within our own culture, we learn a lot of things by just following those around us. But a lot of times we learn what not to do just simply by making mistakes. So that may be one of those times where Oliver, he's been copying any of the guys, but this time, he happened to copy the wrong one. But I think he does have it in his mind that you are supposed to constantly flirt with women, because that's what he's seeing from all the men all the time, especially our hero, Matt.
Yeah. I just find it, and I think I agree with your assessment that he's copying maybe like what he sees as the spirit of what Matt is doing, but he's not emulating specific behaviors, because we don't see Matt getting quite that handsy, and I don't imagine that would be happening in front of Oliver, but he's piecing that together with stuff that he does see, because he is hanging out with this army, and as we have talked about, Matt's not really supervising a lot of who he's spending his time with, and now the women that he's spending his time with are servants who are probably going to be groped a lot by strangers, and that's the kind of thing that he is seeing. So I think that's important to keep in mind. The way it's written here, it's almost like we're supposed to understand he's getting this directly from Matt, but I find the writing confusing in that we have to do a little bit of this mental gymnastics here to figure it out, because we don't actually see Matt doing stuff quite that overtly physical.
Right. As I said, unless that's just such a norm in that society that Matt doesn't think about it. Now, I mean, that's possible. I will give Robert Jordan that much credence. The world has such realism that if that's acceptable, at least in the social circles where Matt runs in the taverns and all, if that's considered socially acceptable behavior, or at least normal behavior by most men, then he may be doing that, and just that's why he doesn't mention it, because he's not really aware of it. But I don't really think so. Matt just seems more of a smooth operator to me. He doesn't seem to be that crude and uncaring about people. I think he really he really cares about the relationships he's building, even though they're largely one night stands. Because, again, he wants the woman to enjoy herself, enjoy being with him. He doesn't just want to have a good time. He wants to have a good time with someone who's enjoying themselves and who's happy with their relationship.
Yeah, I guess it wouldn't be unusual for a 10-year-old to pick up on the wrong messages, though. Like, emulate some of the behaviors, but do it in a way that's out of context and is a problem. So it's believable, yeah. And so I think it's important that we kind of talk through and maybe try to figure out, you know, what we know about Matt's character and what about Oliver is consistent with that and what isn't. So I think we kind of come to a pretty good middle here where we've maybe pieced it together.
And to some degree, it's not just that a 10-year-old would do that, but men tend to emulate other men. So yeah, just the fact that he's male, he's going to pick up bad habits. We just tend to do that. We have to be trained not to pick up certain bad habits. And I don't mean that to just say bad things or disparaging things about men. You know, not all men are rapists or whatever, you know, whatever kind of label you want to put, but we all have that capacity, just like any human being has the capacity to be a murderer, even though we're not all murderers. We all have the capacity to be thieves, though many of us find that, you know, disgusting and reprehensible. So men do tend to pick up bad habits from other men. We do tend to, as people, become like the people we hang around with or with whom we hang around.
Yeah.
So,
and that's a point I was going to bring up, maybe associated with a different chapter. I don't even remember where I had this, but I think it works very well for our entire Ebu Dar arc.
Yes.
So this is as good a time as any to bring it up. Violence and statistics about violence and violent crimes are very cultural. So there have been a lot of searches for what biological factors might make somebody more at risk for being violent and being aggressive. And, you know, there's evidence in the fact that you said, you know, there's this capacity in a lot of men that led a lot of people to say, is this testosterone based? You notice animals get less aggressive when they're castrated, so maybe there is some testosterone influence there. It turns out that all the sort of medical or biological influences on violent behavior that you can find in humans, and there are very, very many, actually only contribute a pretty small amount in explaining the differences in violence that we see between people. So, and that explains why between different countries, or even between different families, you could see vast differences of what kind of violent behavior gets expressed. So, yes, testosterone does actually influence violence, but not in the way most people think, in the way that you might think about in other animals. It's more so that if people get a short burst of testosterone in the moment, they tend to be, and this goes for men and women, you can inject anybody with a little bit of extra testosterone,
yes,
and they get more competitive and more interested in doing socially dominant behaviors. So they're going to be more interested in coming out on top, being a leader in some way, and so that doesn't lead directly to violence, but it puts them in positions where their motivations could easily lead them towards that if they didn't have great impulse control. And we have other biological factors. And you can see this in other animals as well, that the greater testosterone in like a troop of baboons or something, the ones with the most testosterone tend to be the most dominant, whether or not that means violence. They just tend to want to exert power over others in some way. Cool. And then we have others like serotonin. If you have a slow kind of recycling of the neurotransmitter serotonin in your brain, you tend to be more emotionally reactive. And so people with genetic variants that lead them to have this slower recycling of serotonin in their brains, it kind of circulates more slowly, they tend to be more violent. But it's not because, again, this biological thing just causes violence. It makes you more kind of emotionally sensitive and reactive in general, so you're going to be more likely to fly off the handle. And then if we combine that with something like cortisol, a stress hormone, when you have high levels of cortisol, you tend to be fearful and anxious, so you're probably not going to get into a violent situation as easily. However, if your cortisol is low and you have high testosterone and this something else, like maybe this serotonin issue, you're going to be way more likely to not be inhibited. You're not going to self-regulate your behavior as well, so you're going to be kind of more likely to fly off the handle and not be afraid of the consequences. And maybe find the potential consequences of being violent more rewarding in the moment as you maybe quickly weigh that decision. But there's so many, many factors. You could say this person, if they have this condition, they're more likely to be violent, but it's still actually a social thing. It's still a choice, and it's still very much based in the habits that they pick up from other people, just like you were talking about Oliver. So that can explain I feel like we end up having to talk about gender differences so much because of the way they're talked about so explicitly in the world of this series. And
It's definitely a part of this universe. Yes.
yeah, and the violence difference between genders, I think, is very much in our face when we're in Ebu Dar, where we see that the women are the more violent ones. And Matt even remarks, because it's so much more obvious while he's here, that, wow, I think every woman has a violent streak, right? And we see it built into the power structure and the culture so that women are kind of allowed to get away with this physical violence without many negative consequences to them for it. So I think maybe Robert Jordan understood that pretty well, that culture has such an influence over what types of violence or other behaviors might be acceptable. And he showed us an interesting little thought experiment here of what if the women were the ones in power and they were the violent ones.
Right. And I kind of, I started that conversation jokingly about, how men pick up bad habits, and we do, but there is a lot of truth to that. And in fact, when it comes to socially acceptable behavior, what levels of violence or competitiveness or things are acceptable and what are not, most of that, our default is basically the wrong thing. Our default is to take it too far, to see what's around us, and we take it one step further. Really, proper behavior is something that has to be taught. We've never had to teach people how to be murderers, how to be thieves, how to be rapists, how to be bullies, how to be any of the things that people do that we find to be negative or disgusting. You never have to teach people how to do that. You have to teach children how not to do that. We have to teach how to handle emotions because they become overwhelming, how to handle frustrations, how to handle societal situations we find ourselves in, how to handle flirting. That's really a big thing that we don't teach in our society largely. We allow movies and television to handle that, and oftentimes those are bad examples, but we don't really teach young men and young women how to flirt. That's one of the things I kind of liked about this series, about the Domani women. There's a stereotype that Domani women are always alluring and they can lead men around and not actually cross the line with them. In fact, they consider that to be very improper, to actually have a tryst or a one night stand with a man, but to use their womanly wiles to lead him on to get what they want. And I find that interesting. They taught their daughters how to flirt. And, they never had to teach them not to or teach them it's wrong. It's just, here's how you do it. Here's the right way to flirt. This is the way you can get ahead in business. And this is how you can, make these deals that will be good for your company, for your family, for whatever the situation is. And so I just found that interesting that, you don't have to teach bad habits. You have to teach children, good habits, or you have to teach them the things not to do. But not everything has to be, no, don't do that. Oftentimes you could take what's naturally there and teach them how to guide it. I personally think it would be a good thing if men taught their young boys how to flirt with women properly, and women how to flirt and accept the attentions of a man properly. I think that could be good for our societies, because it seems like, at least in this fictional account, man, it really worked well.
Yeah, that's a great point. I totally agree that we don't do a great job of doing that, and that there are enough negative influences out there that will teach people if you don't make a conscious effort to give positive examples otherwise. So I think that wraps up a lot of the thoughts that I was going to have about my chapter later, and I didn't have much else to say about this one, except I think there's one funny thing I've noticed all throughout this book so far, is that our characters have this really good fluency in reading Ebu Dari symbols and codes. They have all these codes in their marriage knives about what it means about their status in society, whether they are married or widowed or whatever. And they're all this complicated system of how many children they have, whether those children are male or female, whether they're living or not, how they died. Right. And our characters just read that pretty quickly. And I'm wondering, when did they learn this? Did they, I guess on the road, did they have somebody teaching them? Did they bring some books along with them for the ride to Abu Dar so that they could figure that out? Because otherwise I'm just like, how would you read all those things that quickly? I mean, it takes me, a minute to read a clock.
Right.
I don't know how you can glean that much so quickly.
Right. Yeah, I wondered about that. Perhaps Van Dien and Adelaus, were filling them in on it.
Yeah.
Perhaps Tom. There were people who had been there before who knew a little about the place. Or perhaps once they got there, Queen Tylin, kind of took the girls aside. Here's some things you may want to know about Ibudar, and explain that or something. I don't know. It is interesting.
Maybe you get a tour guide that kind of, like you might in another country where they teach you how to say hello and maybe you order your food or something. Maybe they teach you how to read these marriage knives so you know who to mess with and who not to.
Yes, because I started to say something that would make you think I'd never read this series. I started to say maybe it was explained to one of them and they told the others. But nobody ever tells anybody anything in the Wheel of Time. Yeah. Right. I'm sorry, I forgot where I was for a moment there. Well, you're right. They can read those social cues, but there are so many big things they miss. For instance, of course, Mat comes back to the inn in a very foul mood because the way he's been treated by Mat-Tylin, he's just not used to that. He's out of his comfort zone. He feels like he's half a step off. I do like how that was described, and let me quote this for a moment. He stumped across Malhara Square not seeing anything. Had Nynaeve and Elaine been cavorting with Jacob Carradine and Delida in the fountain beneath the statue of some long-dead queen, he would have passed by without a second look. So I just love it. He's so fixated. You can just see his face glowering as he's walking across the square back to the Wandering Woman. Of course, one of the men's been in a duel, which they're not supposed to do, and everybody's pretending like it's something else, not that. He gets the news about Oliver. So he's got all of these small frustrations that are building. And then, of course, you walk upstairs and the floorboard creaks behind him. And Mat had this thought just a little bit before then, what had happened to my luck? It's like my luck is completely gone. Yeah. And then the Wandering Woman did not have creaky floorboards. So Mr. Satel Anan had a very good inn. She kept it in good repair. It was not the kind of place where floorboards creak. So this guy, Mat's luck, took the bad guy to the only board that creaked. And he stepped on it behind Mat. And the thing I'm getting to by all of this is he fights off this attacker, actually the two attackers, and they're there in this they have this big wooden chest in the room that is empty. And he still thinks these people are after my gold. He thinks of the iron-bound chest that the Legion had brought up. So, later we find out he has that moved and hidden in a better place. It's not kept in their room. But he totally misses that these people are not at all after the gold. They're after Mat. Of course, he doesn't know that he was spotted by Jacob Carradine. He doesn't know any of that. It's not on his radar at all. But I think it's kind of funny. And the next chapter opens up basically with the same idea, the same thing, and his similar ignorance to all of it that's going on around him. And as someone who's so good at reading people and figuring things out and is so great at strategy, I wonder how Mat continues missing this. Whenever you're ready, we'll get into chapter 21 of Swovan Night, and we can find out some other clues that he's just completely oblivious to.
I really appreciated your analysis there, though, and I think it'll tie in well to my chapter, so we can talk some more about that after I'm done with it. But yeah, go ahead with your summary of chapter 21, Swovan Night.
Swovan Night. This chapter opens with the aftermath of a quick scuffle in the dark streets of Ibudar, where Mat had killed one man and driven off two more. Beggars. Wow, they were really getting rough here in the streets of Ibudar nowadays. These had carried clubs and a large sack. They were certainly, and I'll quote this, optimistic about what they would find in his pockets. The thing could have covered him from head to knees. End quote. That made two sets of robbers in one day. What had happened to his luck? But that wasn't important right now, as the common room of the Wandering Woman had been cleared to make room for dancing. He tried a step or two of the dance as he went across the floor, and tried to place an order of food with the serving girl Kyra, but she was not interested. She actually scowled at him, and let him know that there was a woman waiting for him in his rooms. The sound of dice started rattling in his head. Mat went up and entered his room, ready for anything, only to find that it was Brigitta who was waiting to talk with him. "If this is about Oliver," he began. Then suddenly Matt gets a flash of clear memory which came back to him. A memory of Falma, of the Horn of Valir. Dead heroes coming back to fight alongside the Horn Sounder. Brigitta Silverbow among them. Brigitta Silverbow standing in front of him right now. Quote, "You or she, Brigitta for true. Burn my bones to ash. It's impossible. How? How?" End quote. Brigitta explained how she was ripped out of the world of dreams and into our world in an untimely way. Matt seemed to have no problem believing her, and immediately began trying to get her to help him talk some sense into Nynaeve and Elaine. Surely she could command them to be more careful and to accept his help. I mean, these girls were obviously keeping dangerous secrets from him. They were placing themselves in terrible risk. Laughing, Brigitta explained that she was Elaine's warder, that she commanded no one. She even talked to Matt about a few of his own secrets that he was keeping from the girls. When he denied them, she asked him, "Well, what language do we speak, Horn Sounder?" The old tongue," Matt admitted. "I could use a drink," he said. Then he immediately regretted it, knowing how women hated that. But to his surprise, Brigitta loved the idea. She complained that Elaine was always preaching like a Tovan counselor, which was a stuck-up group of people who had been gone for more than 1,000 years. With the dice still rattling in his head, Matt briefly considered climbing out of the window now to get away. That's what any sane person would do. Instead, he said, "A picture or two sounds fine to me."
I love this chapter. It's one I had really been looking forward to, and I think I've said that for the last 2 episodes.
Yes.
But it's so cool. It's one of those like cool, iconic Matt scenes that is so good to experience on its own that I don't even have a lot to say about it. I'm trying to see what all I've got in my notes here, but it's not a whole lot. I really love the atmosphere that's set in the first paragraph. It reminds me of the one that I read it might have been The Shadow Rising, I guess, when Matt was contemplating going through the doorways, and I read the kind of noisy scene in the tavern. And this one sounds similar. And yeah. we often find Matt in these places, in these contexts where there's a lot of noise and there's kind of a cosmopolitan environment. We tend to see people of different classes and people of a lot of different nationalities, and it's such a rich kind of mixture of what's going on in the world, more so than we get from some of our other characters who tend to be entrenched maybe at different ones at different times, but for a while they'll be kind of entrenched in a single culture. We might get, what it looks like to be around a whole bunch of Aes Sedai, or we might get what it's like to be around a whole bunch of Aiel. But Matt gives us this really cool slice of life of what it's like to be around just a lot of regular folks from a lot of different places. And yes. He has this sort of feel to him of this I know I've called him, he feels sort of like a folk hero in a way, almost like he sticks up for the little guy. And I've also deconstructed that aspect of him a little bit, but he has that sense of him that he likes to be among the people. And we also get this feeling about Brigitta too. Her character is very much like that, I think, because she has lived so many different lifetimes, and maybe this is the same reason why Matt gets along well with so many different types of people. They've both lived so many lifetimes that they have been in a lot of different shoes, that they have lived a very cosmopolitan, worldly experience, and they still enjoy the same things, just having a good time, kicking back with a drink. Matt loves his gambling and the women. Brigitta just likes hitting on ugly dudes, and so it's really fun to watch these two characters who have a lot of similarities finally come together. And I've got just a few more thoughts on that after my chapter when Matt reflects on that too. So like I said, there's not really a ton for me to say about this chapter specifically, other than I just super love it.
Right, because the two of them have respectively felt isolated in many ways because there were not a lot of things they could share with other people. Matt doesn't share the things about his memories. In fact, when he says things and people don't know who he's referring to or what he's referring to, or even when he blurts out things in the old tongue, he does it with, it's almost like this, he hesitates, he stops, he changes the subject. It makes him uncomfortable. because he knows no one can relate to what he's thinking. He can't explain it and doesn't want to explain it. Brigida, similar situation. She's constantly referring to people and places and things that don't exist, and no one knows what she's talking about. And so when she says that about the Tovan counselor, every time she looks at some good-looking guy, Elaine starts preaching to her like a Tovan counselor. He knew what that was, and he got it. And they were the only two people in the world who more than likely knew that. I just got it in my mind from, I think it was Avengers Infinity War, when somebody says, makes some kind of reference, and Captain America looks up and looks around. He said, I got that reference. There was just one of those aha moments. I wanted Matt to say, hey, whoa, you're right. I understood those were terrible people, weren't they? Or terribly dull people or something like that. But I just like this instant bond between the two that is nothing romantic or have anything to do with appearance or anything else. It's just they have a shared set of memories that are not identical, but memories of the same things, of the past, of a history that nobody else really knows and understands, and nobody else can get it. And yet these two, if one of them throws this oblique comment out during a conversation, the other one understands it. Then they don't have to stop and explain or try to pretend like they didn't say it. They can let their guard down just a little bit. And in fact, she has admitted to him what she's really admitted to no one else. She said shared her greatest secret with him. And he has not shared his greatest secret with her, but she knows it anyway, somehow. We don't know how she knows about those memories, but she even talks about, when he's speaking in the old tongue, not even aware of it. And she says, well, one moment you've got the accent of Mat-Tylin or the High Lord of this or that. So you go back and forth in accents, but you speak it perfectly. It's not just like you've learned the old tongue, but you've picked up all the idioms and the accents and everything that comes with that language. So she knows he has these memories. She just doesn't know how and doesn't ask. She knows he's the horn sounder, obviously, so she's been waiting for him to puzzle that one out. But I just love that shared set of things that kept them isolated from everyone else, can give them this little bit of camaraderie. And you wanted them to have that. You wanted Matt to have that. You wanted Brigida to have that, a sense of belonging somewhere. And that's part of what their mutual friendship is built upon. Not only do they have similar taste of enjoying drinking and, ogling people, but just the fact they have a little more of a carefree attitude, because I think they've probably learned what's more important in life. I tend to notice that the older I get, the more my opinions have changed as far as what's important in life. The less I'm impressed by titles and things like that. So I think they would have taken that, and as you so aptly put many times, you've turned that up to 11. And they really are not impressed with people. They're not impressed with titles. They just want to enjoy life a little bit, because they understand that's probably one of the healthiest things we can do, is enjoy the times that we have. So I love that. I love that friendship and that camaraderie, and just the fact that he got that reference and nobody had to explain anything. That was a sweet moment to me.
Yeah. It is. There's some great moments of Matt getting a sense of comfort and feeling a sense of kinship in this book, despite the crap that he has to go through with Mat-Tylin. He gets this warm feeling of being at home with Satala Anan, and he's actually kind of confused. That was another thing I forgot to talk about with your last chapter, actually, is that he's sort of confused about his feelings about her. He's like, I don't think about her quite like a mom. Normally I would probably be checking her out, but I don't see her that way for some reason. And it's not because of her age, because we know that Matt will, he'll take a look at women of all ages and wearing all kinds of different clothes. He doesn't really discriminate there. But he thinks it's not really like Aes Sedai, but there's just something about her. And of course, we end up finding out through other perspectives that she used to have the ability to channel, and that's been burned out of her. So I wonder if it's Matt picking up on that, like she should be a channeler. She has that like air about her, but because she doesn't have this sense of superiority over other people because of her channeling and the way that Aes Sedai do, I can relate to her. I don't know. He's got confusing feelings about her. that I don't fully get, but at least when he first met her, he's like, I feel like I've come home. And then when he really gets to talk to Brigitta here, he feels this sense of kinship and comfort, and like he doesn't, once he realizes that she's cool, right? He doesn't have to worry about the way that he talks or the stuff that he talks about, because they share so many interests and share this kind of old soul thing going on. So I'm just happy for him that he gets these feelings of safety with Mat-Tylin, that he gets these feelings of friendship with Brigitta, because otherwise there's already enough kind of hardship for him going on here, but he's got these sort of sunny spots in this book, I think.
Yeah. And I do like that it ends with typical Matt fashion. He's thinking one thing, any sane man would dive out the window right now and get away from this, but he answers instead with, yeah, sure, a picture or two sounds good to me. So he's he's still that dichotomy of he's thinking one thing and doing and saying another, and that's so typical Matt. But I think it does show exactly what you said. He's found a comfort level here that he can sit down and share not just a beer or two, but a pitcher of wine or whatever's being served on Swovan night, and he can get back and enjoy himself now, where he this doesn't have to be as uptight, but it comes out in typical Matt fashion. Think one thing, do something totally different. But that's all I've got about this one. I'm eager to hear about chapter 28 from you, if you're ready.
Sure. Chapter 28 is called Bread and Cheese. After exchanging secrets with Brigitta in chapter 21 that we just covered, there are some conversations that we aren't going to cover because they happen in intervening chapters from other points of view, but just to catch you up really quick, what happened is that Brigitta and Aviendha bullied Elaine and Nynaeve into treating Mat with more dignity. They have apologized to him, they've explained their mission in Ebu Dar, and that explains the kind of strange behavior we see from them in this chapter. So if you had been reading along, maybe it's been a hot minute since your Crown of Swords reread and you've only read our Mat point of view chapters, now you're caught up. However, now that Mat is in on the mission, this also means that he and some of his men are moved into the Tarasin Palace instead of getting to stay in the Wandering Woman. And he knew that he was in for trouble right away because he hates nobles. He didn't want to be anywhere near this palace. Tylin was being weird. But none of his men seemed worried about this. They seemed pretty cool with the change in accommodations, and they wouldn't listen to any of his reasons why this was actually a bad thing. Kyra wasn't any comfort. Ever since she got upset about Brigitta, she has doubled down on that. Mistress Anan was not really any comfort like she sometimes is, because she seemed too busy with something mysterious that Mat promises not to tell about, although he has no idea what she was doing that she swore him to secrecy about. So he's really got nobody at the moment to vent to about why this palace situation sucks so bad. As soon as he's shown into his new chambers, despite a complete lack, I want to note, of affirmative consent to any of these activities from Mat, Tylin restrains, gropes, and kisses Mat until she's interrupted by Tom and Julian arriving to give updates on Elaine and Nynaeve's quest for the Bowl of the Winds. Tylin leaves, frustrated at being thwarted for now, and Mat is both relieved and ashamed. The women are not back from whatever they're doing, and the men aren't really sure what they're up to, but they're probably not in any danger from Caradon because they've got these power-wrought disguises, and Mat finally realizes that's why they could never find them coming and going from the palace. So to kill some time while he's waiting on the women to get back, he stops to check in on Oliver, and Oliver again is picking up on some of these bad habits that also seem to be encouraged by the women caring for him now that he's in the palace too. To kill some more time, Mat sneaks down to the kitchens and gets a quick meal, and he even comes back to his room and starts reading a book before they return. That's how bored he was. According to them, once they get back, they were just taking a walk, they were just meeting some women that the innkeeper knows, and they were just having some boring chats about needlework that they are not going to bore him with. But Mat knows that there's more to it, but he just decides not to push it because they're being sweet for now. So instead, he asserts that he's going to have shifts of bodyguards at all times that they're outside the palace. To his surprise, they sweetly agree. Next thing he knew, Mat was doing just as he was told, sitting at the crummiest inn on the riverfront, drinking with Nalesian, Julian, and Tom, and watching a particular house stuck between some small businesses. None of them know what they're doing here, but Mat insists he's being Taviran. He sees lots of women come and go from the house, many of whom are wearing the red sash of a wise woman. He doesn't know what he's supposed to be able to do here. Intentionally looking for patterns does not work for him, as we know. His luck only kicks in when he's doing something that's supposed to be random. So all he does is watch this house. He doesn't follow any of the people or question them. He checks out the garden every now and then to see if there's anybody sneaking around in there, but he doesn't find anything. Still doesn't really know what he's looking for. When he gets back to the palace, he finds a perfumed note from Mat-Tylin inviting him to private dinner, which he ignores. Instead, he locks himself into his room and he goes to bed hungry. But he finds himself unable to sleep, worried about Mat-Tylin this whole time and whether there's some way she could get in. He tries to bribe a servant to keep him safe, and he gets gently chided by Elaine and Nynaeve for missing dinner with the queen. He mustn't do anything to upset her now. He spends the next several days watching the same house, drinking the same awful tea and ale, and finding nothing, with still no idea what he's really doing there. None of the rest of the men have anything of interest to report about Caradin or about anything else either. Mat does, however, find great companionship in Brigitte, and he's surprised at his ability to see a woman as a friend for once instead of a romantic interest. Back in the palace, his bribed servant turns out didn't do anything to help him, and the rest of the servants, prevent him from stealing meals from the kitchens to try to force him to go to dinner with Mat-Tylin, which he still refuses. So Mat is spending his evenings hungry and irritable. He plays snakes and foxes with Oliver, and he's kind of constantly jumpy and looking over his shoulder. But after several days of being left alone by Mat-Tylin, he starts to look forward to the upcoming Festival of Birds, and he hopes that she will have moved on to another pretty soon. And thus ends Chapter 28, Bread and Cheese.
Oh, yeah. This is the one everyone dreads and everyone loves to hate, because we really get away from the flirting and into the Mat and Tat-Lin maelstrom, I guess you'd say, the storm, the discussion. Everybody either hates it or loves it. This is the part that people love to hate, because there is a lot of controversy over it. And we've talked about that before, so I'm not really going to get into the controversy myself, unless you're ready to delve into it yourself in a few minutes. But there were a few little tidbits that I found amusing. One was, we have the scene where Tat-Lin is putting her hands all over Mat, and when Tom and Julian walks in, she manages to stand back, to not be close to him, to look completely innocent. And he's wondering how in the world his shirt got undone. How many hands does she have? And I found that humorous, just the way his mind was in such a whirl. He couldn't stop her from unbuttoning his shirt and things like that. And I just found that hilarious because of Mat's embarrassment, not so much because of what she did, because of course it didn't go any further than kissing right at that point, but just the fact that he couldn't stop her, and he was so flustered by it, and his embarrassment in front of Tom and Julian. And I found those things humorous, even if nothing else about the situation is to anyone else. Mat's discomfiture was funny to me.
Yeah, I found it difficult to summarize this chapter, controversy aside, actually, this time, just because there were so many different plot points. There's so many different bullet points, and many of them don't really add up to a whole lot. It's more of figuring out the puzzle of the girls learning about the kin, or trying to figure that out. I don't think they've actually fully cracked the case yet. Because why else would they have Mat just watching this house?
Right.
It's Mat not knowing what's going on. Nobody knows where the bowl is. Nobody knows really what Caradin is up to. And so all these different points are kind of in service of that. So we've got Mat learning that he's got to move into the palace, and all the stuff about moving into the palace, and then the scene with Tat-Lin. And then we've got the fact that he's waiting around for the women. And, well, when Tom and Julian burst in, they've got the news is basically that there's no news and that the women are not back.
Yeah.
And then we gotta wait for them. And then when they get back, they don't really report anything. And then Mat gets sent somewhere where he's just kind of scouting out, but we don't even know what he's looking for, and he doesn't know what he's looking for. And so there's so many points here that I don't feel like I have a lot of deep character discussion about, because they're all plot points that start to feel like part of the slog. Okay, we're getting nowhere. We're just here in this hot place. It's like the doldrums, I guess. There, you feel it from the place being described as being hot. There's no wind, and you feel the plot doing the same thing. The characters feel that way, and even from a meta writing perspective, it starts to get that way.
Right.
And let me think if I actually do have something to say about Matt, or about kind of character stuff going on here. It's just interesting to see the new dynamics with how nice the girls are being to him and how he reacts to that.
Yes.
I like that now that they've finally aired some things out. They're obviously being fake nice, really, because it's not like the apologies they actually did of their own accord or anything. They were bullied into it by Brigitte and Avienda, and they're still kind of adhering to that in order to respect Brigitte and Avienda more so than directly to respect Matt, right? So that's who they're kind of seeing as the people they're empathizing with, or the people that they're concerned about impressing. We see Elaine starting to care about Ji Ito, and that's why she's being incredibly, like, laying it on way too thick, being apologetic to Matt, because she's not even looking at him when she does it. He notices, okay, there's something really weird going on here, because Elaine is just looking at Avienda when she's saying, oh, Matt, I'll get on my knees and beg. I'm so sorry. Will you please forgive me? And Avienda's like, okay, that's good. Like, she gives a knowing nod or something, I think. That's enough.
Yeah, you're taking it far enough. Yes. Well, even in your chapter you read, when they come back from having tried to, visit the knitting circle or the kin, and of course they're shut down, they're kicked out basically, and they want Matt to start watching the place. They come back and they start reporting on their day. Oh, nothing. We talked to some ladies about needlework, and it's, I can just see in my mind they are looking too innocent, and he knows something's up. You could tell from the way it's written, he knows something is up, but he doesn't have a clue what yet. So even though there is this new level of openness and honesty, it's not complete yet.
Right. It's still like I said, I 3 oaths kind of open. Like, they're still trying to skirt around it as much as they can. But a new thing, like, Matt is trying to respond to this differently too. So he doesn't push the button of trying to figure out more about what's going on. Right. He just lets it lie. He's like, okay, Nynaeve already told me that she's going to tell me what I need to know, not every little detail. So whatever, I'm not going to get any information out of her anyway. He's like, I know that's a lie. I know it's not just about knitting or whatever.
Yes.
But I'm just going to leave it alone. But I think normally he would not have just left it alone. He is very curious, and he kind of curses his curiosity multiple times in this chapter alone. And realizes, oh, that's gotten me in a lot of trouble, so maybe I need to quit being so curious. So I'm just going to let it lie. Yeah,
fair enough. And I do have to wonder, I'll pitch this idea to you. Would he have accepted this as well had he and Brigitte not have had their aha moment? Had he not realized who she was? I think that facilitated this a lot, that he could be a lot more confident that the girls are okay, because they're typically with Brigitte. Now if he looked over and saw that she was alarmed, then I think he would be a lot more alarmed. But since they've kind of had this understanding between them, I think he can be a little more chill, even knowing the girls are hiding some things. So what are your thoughts on that? Am I just barking up the wrong tree, or?
No, I think that was a great way of framing it. I think that I love that he has finally discovered that he can have this platonic friendship with Brigitte, because it does give him this bridge to the other women. And we've talked about how in this series, men and women especially just emphasize how they're as different as cats and dogs. Right. They always talk about among each other and then among the other gender. Yes. They always talk that way. And Brigitte is just somehow feels kind of above all that pettiness. Right. And she's this bridge between them, because she is kind of an old enough soul that I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said earlier, she really cares about what matters in life. She's got different priorities. And with these priorities, she's able to kind of get on Matt's level. And so now that they have this mutual trust, whereas, Matt has a hard time establishing trust with people because he has these weird superpowers he can't tell anybody about. And, a lot of people have trouble trusting him because he seems this kind of mischievous rogue or whatever. Now that this bridge is built, he can actually communicate with the women, whereas they were both kind of so entrenched in certain kind of archetypes. So that they very much live in their gender roles, but Matt also lives in this like trickster archetype as well, and that separates him from the girls quite a bit. So, and they're just so petty, they're getting even further and further away from him because they're getting so acculturated to the way the Aes Sedai see themselves above everyone else. And so I'm so glad that Brigitte was here to try to facilitate this sort of agreement between them. It's not perfect. It is kind of forced and fake in parts, but I'm glad that she was there for this kind of inroad because I agree with you that it would not have happened otherwise. And I also want to raise a question for you of why you think Brigitte doesn't fall into the strict gender roles that a lot of other people in this series seem to. They're usually like, oh, men are like this, oh, women are like that, and they have problems communicating with each other because of gendered behaviors or gendered stereotypes about behaviors. But Brigitte seems like she can relate to just about anybody. So what do you think about that?
I see part of that, probably multiple reasons, but part of that is a lot of the gender differences, as we've discussed many times, are cultural. When I say gender differences, the way they are viewing, men being from Mars and women being from Venus, and they can't even see one planet from the other. They're so far apart here. And as a disclaimer, I have never read that book. You could probably tell, but I'm just using that metaphor. But yeah, they feel like they're just in two entirely different species. I think most of that is cultural. That they've grown up thinking that way, talking that way. It's become normal. It's become started as a joke and moved into people just kind of think that way. And Brigitte is from several different times. She does not think that way. Perhaps she came from times when that was not such a socially acceptable point of view. In fact, she can probably very clearly remember times during and maybe even before the Age of Legends when men and women worked together much more harmoniously. There was balance. They handled the power differently, but they handled the power together. They handled societal roles differently, but they handled them together. And I think that harmonious balance between men and women, which of course being one of the main structures of this story, being one of the main issues and points that he's making of how bad things get when they're out of balance that way. So I think that's one of the reasons he continually harps on this cultural viewpoint they have of men and women being unable to understand one another, just to show the effect that imbalance has had, this misunderstanding and miscommunication between gender roles. So I think those two things play into it more than anything. Yeah.
Plus, I totally agree. I think the kind of miscommunication between genders is part of the brokenness of the world. So I like that you brought up in the Age of Legends. That's something we're always sort of trying to aspire to in universe, is to get back to the way men and women work together better. And Brigitte has lived so many different lifetimes in so many different cultures where we see gender roles being so different. When you get into any different region of this map, they're kind of all over the place. Yeah, Brigitte probably has a consistent sense of self that's not tied to a single society's gender role, and I think you articulated that pretty well. But I'm sorry, again, because of our connection issues, I think I interrupted you from another point, so I'll let you
that's fine.
Take that.
I just want to say as well, I think a lot of the gender viewpoints here come from a sense of, grow out of a sense of insecurity. So many people are insecure. Now, as an example, this running joke of, I wish I'd asked Rand about these girls because he obviously understands women better than I do. Perrin, Matt, whomever, they're constantly thinking that. That's born out of a sense of insecurity. And one of the things that we all admire about Brigitte is her sense of confidence. You would never use the term insecurity in how Brigitte views herself or views the world. So she doesn't have to hide behind that. She doesn't, she's not having to constantly doubt, oh, does this guy really like me or does he not like me? So I'm going to pretend like I can't understand men because I'm really insecure about this entire relationship. She can just kind of relax and say, hey, I am who I am.
Yeah.
I'm confident in who I am. If you don't like me, fine. If you do like me and you happen to be an ugly guy, I'll check you out. I'm good with that. So in fact, I think that's one of the reasons she's not just attracted to the pretty boys. Now even she might swoon over Galad from what I'm given to understand, but she's not really attracted to the pretty boys. She's attracted to these ugly, blocky looking men whom no one else really looks at, because she doesn't have to have just appearances. She's looking for something different in person. She's looking at personality and other things, and there's and I think a lot of it is this attraction to Guidel Kane, who's probably not an attractive person from many of the ways he's described. So she has this instinctive draw toward him, but she's confident in who she is. She doesn't have to impress somebody. She doesn't have to have the cutest guy in the room on her arm, or she feels like she's less of a person. She's the same person either way. And I think that confidence and lack of insecurity really helps feed into that as well.
Yeah, I really like your analysis of Brigitte. Kind of makes me wish there was just more of her in the series and maybe more like Brigitte points of view.
That is one of my points of apprehension about the upcoming show is, of course, it's not been released yet as to whom they've cast for the role of Brigitte. They've probably not even cast that role yet because she doesn't come into the story for a while. But yeah, if which they've done such a great job of casting so far, I guess I should not have any apprehension. But she's one of those that you better get that right. If it's not a woman who can be very confident, very strong, and yet not just come across as just mean and horrible, then it's never going to feel right for Brigitte, because Brigitte needs to be strong, needs to be confident, she needs to know what she's doing, but she's not hateful and mean. And that's tough to pull off.
Yeah, I think the casting for her would be really crucial. She's got, we've talked about this kind of old soul thing that it would be difficult for actors to do as well, and I think you gave a good example of somebody who did in, what was it, Travelers?
Yes, Travelers.
That you talked about? Yeah. And, I said that Matt needs to have something like that too, and it would be good for maybe Rand too at times as well, so I'm going to be curious to see how well they pull that off. But Brigitte for sure she needs some other kind of confident air about her. Yes. And she is one of my favorite characters because of that. And I did check, and she's only got really a handful of point of view chapters. And they probably weren't long or super memorable. Right. That's why I didn't even remember whether there were any.
Yeah, I didn't think there were any, just right off the top of my head. So.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I will be looking for those in my reread, because I do like me some Brigitte.
Yeah.
It's
the first one shows up in
attitude.
Knife of Dreams, so we're still going to have to wait a little bit.
Yes. Thank you. All righty. Well, very good. Well, I feel like we've wrung a lot of information out of these chapters.
Yes. I'm going to see if I have any other notes real quick. Oh, I've got one that's funny. And maybe uncontroversially funny, I hope. So Matt got this note, and I guess it was chapter 21 that he just found in his pocket, and I totally would have skimmed over this because, he read the note and tried to puzzle it out, but it was all so quick, and I had to go through and actually read very carefully to find when he touched the paper in his pocket, because it suddenly, there's all this stuff between Satala and An and her husband, and then it's suddenly like, Matt opened the paper and read it. I'm like, what paper? Where did that come from? Yes. Was that in the chest? I had to read it over and over. But I think we're supposed to believe, and you mentioned this in a previous episode, that it's from Mat-Tylin or Jolene when they had their hands on him, when the Aes Sedai kept arguing over him and kind of pulling him back and forth in the palace a while back. And I think that's corroborated by the fact that there's a perspective from one of them. There's like a kind of a spotlight on Mat-Tylin and Jolene right after that Matt point of view. But the funniest thing I was going to bring up about that is that you're probably going to continue to hear this as we go throughout Matt's arc, but Jolene is one of those names that I cannot help but say in a very country way. I can't uncountrify that name.
Yes. Jolene, Jolene.
Yeah, of course.
Yes. I love it. I think of that every time.
Yeah, of course. And she's the Dolly is our best representative from our kind of area, our neck of the woods, I guess you could say.
Yes.
So I sort of feel a tie to that anyway. But yeah, with all my 9 consecutive years of higher education in small cities and kind of getting out of the country, I still can't uncountrify any way to say that name.
Yes.
My mouth just can't wrap around it in any other way. It's Jolene. And I just can't even read it in my head that way. It kind of takes me out of the story every now and then because it pulls me into Appalachia.
Yes. I find this so funny, and because it does the same thing to me. Even hearing Michael Kramer say it in the reread, I hear it. I hear Dolly Parton with Jolene. That's so funny to me. So, and don't think that I'm a huge Dolly Parton fan.
And I just gotta believe that Robert Jordan also knew that association. Like he.
Yes, it would be the world's largest coincidence if he did not.
Right.
But yeah, for me, I mean, I like some of Dolly Parton songs, but I'm not this huge Dolly Parton fan. It's just one of those things that sticks in my mind. I'm
it's a cultural touchstone, I think, for sure.
Oh, yeah. I'm more of a Leonard Skinner and, rock kind of guy, but still, that's just one of those things. It hits me every time, every single time.
Same here. Not a big country fan, but she's just one of the few. We don't have a lot of good representatives from our part of the world. And a lot of Southerners get kind of a poor representation in media. And so I think she's one of our few celebrities we can really hold up. Like, look, she's not just like a good performer, but she like buys books for children and stuff. Right. Yes. She's enriching her area that she's from. So
she is literate and has a full set of teeth. Yes.
There you go. Exactly.
Some of the things that I hope all of you love about The Wheel of Mind is that, yes, we get deep into the mind of our characters, and then we get splashing around in shallow waters as well. So,
yes, I think that's a great way to put that. Subscribe to Wheel of Mind on Podbean, Stitcher, Google Play, Apple, Spotify, or on YouTube. You can find us under the name Lajaradane, Lajaradayne, to get notified when a new episode drops every Wednesday. We'd also love it if you could leave us some feedback by rating and reviewing on your preferred podcast listening platform. So if you listen to us on Podbean, that's probably just the little heart. But if you're on Apple or something, a full review could be really helpful for us. Or contact us a little more personally. You can reach out to me through lajaradane@gmail.com. You can reach me on Twitter @mind_wheel. And Giskel is not super online with like Insta or Twitter or anything like that, but anything that goes to _mind_wheel will go to him as well. I'll make sure to pass it along. Or find our website, which is not updated as often as some of our other media, but we are still reachable through the contact me form there. And this is not the ending to the turning of Wheel of Mind, but it is an ending. Sorry about that. What were you saying?
We are constantly trying to update, to change, to add to our technology, add new ways of reaching out to all of our podcast listeners. So just thank you for bearing with us, for being a part of what we do, and helping us enjoy this. Such a great community of people out there.
Yeah, I'm really happy that we got what seems like a pretty stable number of like core listeners, and I think they've really borne with us, I guess you could say. Screw that up, but I think they've really borne with us through a lot of different changes, and they've been very patient, and we really appreciate the patience and the feedback and everything that we've gotten.
And something I failed to say earlier, y'all all join us next week for episode 21 of season 2, where we look at chapters 29 and 37 of A Crown of Swords.